I'm in.
All
Let's
right.
go.
Well, I'll kick it off here. There we go. There's our pictures. I'm Andy Bassett. I'm the CEO here at Ellerbrock-Norris. I've got Chase Bassett to my left. He's one of our lead risk advisors. We do share the last name. As you can see, we're a family business here at Ellerbrock. We are cousins, not brothers.
That's right.
But Chase will lead the lion's share of the content today. He is undeniably an expert in this space. So I'll be turning it over to him here in a second to lead through the content and, like I said, drop some knowledge on all of us. But here we go. Ready to rock?
Ready to go.
All right. Well, hopefully everybody again can hear, as we started to say earlier. Please hit the chat with questions as we go, or if there's any technical issues, let us know, and Cam will make sure to get things squared away. But at that, I'll jump through a couple kind of high-level slides here before I do kick it over to Chase for the content. I think this is important. This is the brand tagline here at Ellerbrock-Norris: protect your purpose. And I think what I want to express here as we enter into this conversation is, at Ellerbrock-Norris, our philosophy, our goal is to always be looking at risk, primarily for privately held, independently owned companies, at a real holistic level, right? And I think when you think about it, you see this graphic. It's, how do we connect the things we face every day in a business as owners or leaders in those businesses to then our personal lives and even furthermore to the future? And so I think as we dive into a pretty specific topic today, I'd always like people to focus, how does this actually connect to this graphic, holistically? Because that's, again, our philosophy and belief here at Ellerbrock-Norris. And then when we talk to clients, prospects, and we're communicating our message consistently in the market, we're always talking about what we call the 10 impact areas of risk, right, Chase?
That's right.
And today we're obviously going to focus on one that's kind of on the left of that center line, which is the safety and specifically the EMOD. But I think what I want to express here is the risks that face our businesses, while they can be categorized in these areas, they absolutely impact one another, right? And so having a solid plan around your EMOD and around safety, it doesn't just lie in that specific area. And so I think as the mindset I want everybody to keep as we go through this is, while we're going to be dialed very specifically on the EMOD, this graphic shows well is that not only does that impact safety, but it impacts benefits and retention. So think of retention employees. We keep people safe, we retain people, right? People want to work for safe companies. Compliance, think of OSHA and all the things that come along with that. This is definitely connected to that. Or insurance. There's obviously a clear ROI, which we're going to talk about here as we control our EMOD and how that impacts insurance costs. Contracts and legal. I mean, a lot of people are going to be familiar with this, that we can't even get on jobs sometimes today if our mods aren't below certain thresholds, and those contracts lay that out. And then, of course, key personnel planning. Also, again, keeping our key people engaged in this conversation does nothing but help us plan for the future with those key people. And then finally, just wrapping the overall risk management strategy of our company around this conversation. So again, really it's to set a framework of mindset for everybody that's tuned in and listening. Is we're going to dive into a very specific topic. Chase is going to get really, a little bit technical in some areas on the EMOD, but at any moment, just always think about, how does this connect to the broader, not only safety, but risk management strategy in an organization? Then even further, how does that connect to, personal lives of you and your team, and ultimately the future of the company? So
very, very well said. Like I said, if you have that holistic picture across the company, you're going to set yourself up for success in this one particular area that we're going to talk about today, versus viewing it in a silo. It's going to be much harder to really have as much impact as you want in what we're going to talk about today, controlling your premiums on the workers' compensation side.
And that, I'll kick it over to you. Going forward, I will, of course, chime in with context when I think it makes sense, or if you want to kick something over to me, feel free. But otherwise, I'll let you go through the agenda and start to get into the experience modification.
The riveting conversation of workers' compensation and the experience mod. So yes, thank you, Andy, for the introduction. Like you said, I'm Chase Bassett, a risk advisor here. This is a conversation that we get tremendously passionate about for a lot of different reasons. And as we start to talk about the 8 ways to lower your workers' compensation premium, we will talk about the experience mod and the impact that has on your overall premium when it comes to workers' compensation. So that's going to be a big focus of the conversation today. Newsflash for everybody. And usually we do this in person. So by show of hands, how many people have been frustrated with the workers' compensation system as a whole, a workers' compensation claim, an audit? If we were in person, I would imagine everybody would probably have their hands.
I think all their virtual hands are up right now.
Definitely. They're definitely up right now.
Are there a few raising? Cam says a few are in fact raising.
Feel free to drop a chat or comment in the chat.
I am shocked. I thought we all loved work comp.
I'm telling you, no, not everybody does, but it's a very frustrating system. And newsflash, the system is really set up for you as the employer to essentially lose or to really fail. And what I mean by that is work comp is very employee centered and employee friendly. The whole reason for workers' compensation was to, compensate individuals that work for us if they get hurt on the job, to provide them with those lost wages. They do get hurt while they're working for us, and also to cover their medical bills, right? It is viewed as a benefit, just like health insurance is. Now, over time, that's obviously evolved, and it's evolved into a system where it's very easy unfortunately, for an employee to manipulate. So it can be very frustrating. And the newsflash is you're never going to be able to control this or have 100% control over your experience mod and the workers' compensation system. What we're going to talk about today is what are the things that you can do to put yourselves in the best possible position to be able to have as much control as you can. But understand you're never going to have 100% control. And moving on from today, there will still be times and circumstances that drive frustration when it comes to this topic. So with that, let's dive in. Today, we're going to talk about the 8 ways to lower your mod, everything from building the culture of working safely all the way through to carrier credits. The carrier credits is kind of a bonus that we have for everybody. So stick around to the end and we'll make sure we save some time for questions. So anything you want to add to that?
Well said.
All right. With that, let's dive in. So let's talk about the experience mod factor first. Why do we care? Andy already mentioned, obviously the mod is directly tied to your workers' compensation premiums. If your mod is over certain levels, you can't even get on job sites if you're in the construction space. So when you talk about the impact of not being able to get on jobs, it takes your workers' compensation premium impact and probably makes it pretty small if you can't get on projects and do work. So obviously, I think we all know why we care about it. To start, we want to talk about how is the experience mod factored into our workers' compensation premium. So we feel like this graph does a good job of highlighting that. You see on the far right is your total premium. To get to that number, what the insurance carriers do is they take the job descriptions and the type of work that your employees do via classification codes, and they assign a rate to each one of those classification codes. That rate is based on essentially how risky that class of operations is. So up here we have food products manufacturing. That rate is probably going to be much lower than your roofer, right? It's just considered higher risk. So they take those rates, they multiply it by how much work you're doing in that area via payroll. They do it by payroll by per 100. They multiply it by the rate, and that is how you get your manual premium. And they do this by several different classification codes based on the work that you do. So it could be, in this case, could be food products manufacturing. It could be things like clerical, supervisors, et cetera. But they add all those up, and that gets you to your manual premium. They take that manual premium, and this is where the mod comes into play. They multiply that directly by, got ahead of ourselves here. They multiply that directly by your experience mod. There are some credits and debits, which we'll get into, and that's how you get your total premium. So what we're highlighting here is the biggest factor into calculating your total premium on the right is your EMOD. And obviously you can see if your mod is a 0.50, it's going to take that manual premium and cut it in half when calculating your total premiums that you pay on an annual basis. Also, vice versa, if your mod is a 2, your premiums are going to double just like that in calculating your total premium. So it's a huge impact. The best way to control your overall workers' compensation is, in fact, by controlling the mod factor. So that's why we spend so much time on it.
And those are real dollar swings. I think everybody's realizing that. Wow, if I can cut it in half or it could double, those are big dollars.
And we're going to talk about your controllable mod here in a little bit of where your mod's currently at and what it could be, the ideal target. And you're right, it certainly adds up. So we're going to get into how is the mod calculated and who calculates the experience mod. So NCCI, they are a data collection regulatory body on workers' compensation. They regulate workers' compensation in about 35 states when it comes to the mod. And what they do, really, they're just a data collection organization. So your carrier, every year, they send in your information to NCCI. They send in information on the type of work you're doing and also the amount of that work via payroll. And via the law of large numbers, with all this data they take in, they can get really good at predicting your expected losses, the losses that they expect you to have based on your size and the industry that you're in. To calculate your mod, they take what you as an individual company actually did. They compare it to the expected claims that they calculate, and it's just a divisible formula. Take the numerator into the denominator, and that's how you calculate your experience mod. So if your actual was the same as they expect, your experience mod would be a 1, and theoretically you'd be average, right? If your actual is better than expected, it goes below a 1, you're better than average. And if it goes above, or if your actual is more than expected, it'll go above a 1 and you're below average, essentially. So that's how the mod is calculated in its simplest form. Now you can see the formula on the left there. That is the actual formula that they use to calculate the mod. It's very complex. Any more computers do it, but in the simplest form, it's the actual claims over expected, and that's how you get your experience mod. A question we usually ask when we're in person is, does anybody know the time period they take into account when they calculate your actual losses? How many years worth of data do they take in to calculate your actual versus expected losses? Andy, drum roll.
I mean, I know the answer. We'll see if somebody pops an answer in there. Maybe not.
I bumped the slide forward, so
I gave the answer.
Everybody the answer there.
I'm sure everybody knows and is answering, but yeah, it's 3 years, right? That's a long period of time.
That's exactly right. It's really a lagging indicator. So we always tell people you pay for your past sins, right? Claims that have happened in the past, they affect you for years to come. And what we're looking at here is, this is the second page or subsequent page of a mod worksheet. And you can see they break it down by state, and they take 3 years worth of data. And that's what it shows here, right? So if you're here in Nebraska, you'd have these 3 boxes for Nebraska, and they'd break it out over those 3 years. And that's the data that they take into account when calculating those actual and expected losses to calculate your EMOD. Another way to look at this is, here's a simpler way to do it. So for your mod this year, none of the claims that happened in 25 to 26 would be included into that, but the 3 years prior would be included in your experience mod. So again, really it's a lagging indicator. Anything that happened most recently, you're not going to see the effects until the following year.
Yeah, so something happening today lingers with us for a period of ultimately 4 years. It has its actual impact for 3, but it is going to be 4 years in time before that kind of.
There's nothing you can do.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think, to your point, today's challenges become, impact us for quite some time.
Absolutely. And the dollars just compound year over year. And so one of the things I'll mention here is, a lot of times we get the question of, okay, I just had this claim. What future impact is it going to have on my mod? Those are projections that you can run. So just wanted everybody to know that there is tools out there to be able to do that, because it's a common question we get, especially if somebody's in the construction industry, have a bad claim. Of course, they're worried about that mod getting over 1 and affecting the ability to get on projects. So it's a lagging indicator, and it does stick with you. Again, goes back to the frustrations with workers' compensation in general. Okay, so what is your target experience mod factor? So I already mentioned above a 1, below average, below a 1, above average. But what is the goal? How low could my mod go, and what are we shooting for? Obviously, below 1 is good. That's the most common answer we get when we ask that. But really, it's your minimum. Your minimum should be the goal. Now, that would be a world where you didn't have any claims over that 3-year period. Is that realistic? Probably not. But at least if you, like we always say, if you know the score, or how do you win the game if you don't know the score, right? If you know what you're shooting for, you can at least put a target out there to be able to improve on a consistent and an ongoing basis. So to calculate your minimum specific to your organization, all you do is you take the stabilizing value and you divide it into the total expected losses. Okay. So for this organization, their minimum is a 0.55.
Yep.
So when you talk about that swing that you just mentioned in this affecting your work comp premiums, I mean, this is a what, a 75% swing from where they're at to where they ultimately could be. Again, is 0.555 realistic? Maybe not, but is 0.75, 0.70? Absolutely. And those are the real dollar impact that we have to consider versus a 1.3 compared to a 1.
Yeah, well, and I think this is a really important slide because anybody can do this calc real easy. I don't know that it gets talked about a lot. That's the experience we find when we talk to people about this. And it's eye-opening, right? People hear all the time, oh, I'm a 1, I'm great. Well, not that that's not good, but it's essentially average. But when people realize, oh, I could have a 0.55 in this example, it kind of opens your eyes as to what's the goal. Where should we put our sights? And so anyway, easy, quick calculation you can all do on your own.
Yep, definitely worth doing. It'll be different for every organization. The larger your payrolls are, the lower your potential minimum mod will be. So every organization has their unique minimum mod. Okay, so how do you remember this? So what we were just talking about is your controllable mod. That is the difference between where you're at today. So here, your actual mod is in red, that 1.30 compared to where you could be. We call that difference the controllable mod. So for this organization, in this example, we're showing it's a 75, 76 point swing. For them, the annual premium impact is $313,000, and that's in 1 year. So remember, the mod is a lagging indicator. It affects you over a period of time. So when you extrapolate this out over 3 years plus, I mean, you're getting to $1 million in a hurry. And the way we like to think about this is,
oh man,
when you think about below average, above a 1, unfortunately, you got to think of Nebraska football. That's kind of where we've been over the past several years. However, when you talk about above average, best in class, when you get down to that 0.55 mod, of course, think of the volleyball team. And that's
how the basketball team right now, too.
Or the basketball team. They're on a roll now. We'll see how long that lasts, but that's the way to remember it. Had to throw in Nebraska sports at some point.
Well, and I want to hit on something here too, because this is going to carry into the rest of the conversation, the controllable piece. We call it that because you absolutely do have control over it, right? To your point, you said earlier, we don't have full control over everything, but we have a lot of control of how we can get ourselves more towards that minimum mod and start closing the gap.
Absolutely. You got to set yourself up for success.
Yep.
So, okay. So that's a background on the mod, how it's calculated, what your goal mod should be. Obviously, this is has the biggest impact on your work comp premiums. Now we're going to go into what are the 8 things that you can do to essentially control your experience mod, i.e. control your workers' compensation premiums. So this is the meat of today. Here are the things that you can do moving forward and implement right away. So the first one is build a culture of working safely. So this is by far the one way, if you want to control your work comp premiums, is if you don't have accidents because you have a great culture of working safely, everything else we're going to talk about today just takes care of itself. You don't have accidents, you don't have to worry about it. Obviously, we're in environments where that's not the case. We always like to differentiate between having a safety program and having that culture of working safely. 2 very different things. Anybody can have a safety program. They can have all the documents. They can do all the training in the world. But if your team is not bought into, being safe and holding each other accountable, recognizing positive, safety actions, then you're never going to take advantage of, being as safe as you can and really eliminating accidents on an ongoing basis. So it's important to have that culture of working safely. So we want to start by hitting on that leadership has to be involved from the get-go. They have to take ownership of it. The recurring training, the job site inspections, making it a regular cadence of this is just what we do, right? Safety is that ingrained within our organization that we focus on it constantly. It can't be once a year, can't be really once a month. It's got to be an ongoing initiative for the organization. Processes behind accountability, having that designated safety contact, being proactive. These are all things that are going to start to lead to having that culture of working safely. Record keeping is, of course, extremely important. Like Andy mentioned, this conversation goes beyond just work comp and safety. When you start talking about record keeping, that gets into compliance and OSHA compliance, has a big impact on that. And then also a safety committee, anything that you can do to get employees bought in to the safety program and have them be able to provide input, feedback. That's what's going to ultimately help you have that culture working safely. So if you can get this right, when you talk about control, it's going to put you in the best possible position to control your mod and your premiums moving forward.
Well, exactly. And over the years, our team has been on the job sites inside the four walls of many, many companies. And I can promise you, we've seen the ones that are getting lucky, and we've seen the ones that actually believe in a culture of working safely. And over the long run, every time I'm betting on the company that's got the culture.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just can't stress how important it is to lean into this, put the investment into it, because the ROI is significant. And we're going to touch on that in certain regards today.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Being lucky is a good thing, but your luck only goes so far. And we see that time and time again. So it's a really good point. Okay. So moving on to number 2 here. If you have no other takeaways from today's conversation, this is the one you want to pay attention to. If you can take away just this aspect of the presentation and the conversation today, you'll be ahead of 99% of people when it comes to managing your mod and ultimately your premium. So what we're going to talk about is claims management, specifically the experience rating adjustment. So when you do have a workers' compensation claim, it can be categorized one of 2 ways. The first way being a medical only claim, and the other way is being an indemnity claim. Okay. So medical means an employee gets hurt on the job. The only expense the insurance company incurs is the medical bills to get to get that employee back to 100%, right, and fix their injury. The other piece is medical bills and also indemnity, i.e. lost wages, right? They're required to be off of work for a period of time, which entitles them to indemnity or lost wages. What the experience rating adjustment says and does is if you can keep claims medical only, meaning the insurance carrier doesn't have to pay them those lost wages, those claims are going to be discounted 70% when they go into the calculation of your experience mod. Okay. So you get a 70% discount on all medical only claims, which is a huge deal. And we're going to show some specific examples of that. The reason NCCI does this, like it says, is to incentivize safety, incentivize recover at work, getting injured employees back to work in some form or fashion after an injury, and then also discourage workers from paying those small claims out of pocket. We hear that all the time, but really it just creates risk for the organization. If you have a small claim that gets worse later and you don't report it, could be reason for a work comp carrier to give you a denial on a claim. So, and really those small claims with this 70% discount, I mean, they have minimal impacts on an organization anyway. So it just makes sense to turn those small ones in. So really important, medical only claims, 70%. Even if $1, 1 cent in indemnity or lost wages has been paid out, it takes this whole 70% discount and throws it right out the window. So it's a really big deal. We're going to dive into this a little bit. So employee gets hurt on a specific day. How many days do we have to get that injured employee back to work before they are entitled to lost wages? Andy?
Talking about the waiting period.
About the waiting period.
It varies state to state, right? And so people do need to understand that in each of their states, but there is going to be a period of time in each state in which the waiting period applies.
Exactly right. Here in Nebraska, we are very favorable in our waiting period, and it is 7 days. Okay. So on day 8, and it's calendar days, okay, not working days, it's calendar days. On day 8, this is when lost wages and indemnity are due. And there's a specific statute. What it says is if we have an injured employee get hurt today, we have that period of 7 days to get them back to work in some form or fashion and continue paying their wage. And if we don't, and that period lapses, then they're entitled to indemnity or lost wages. Again, once that happens, that 70% discount medical only claims goes out the window. So in Nebraska, very favorable. Iowa, I believe, is 3 days. And I think South Dakota and Kansas are both 5 days. I don't think anybody that's with surrounding states of Nebraska is 7 days. So we're very favorable here in Nebraska with this. So there is a period of time where you can get an injured employee back to work, but I wouldn't count on this. I would do whatever you can to get them back to work the next day if possible. But there is a buffer there. Okay, so how do you know which claims that you've had have been categorized as medical versus indemnity? And here's how you do it. It's via the injury code on your experience model worksheet. So if you look at not the first page, but the second or third pages on your work comp experience mod worksheet, you're going to see a little a chart that looks like this. And again, this is 1 year of the 3-year period that we look at. And you're going to see that column there, the IJ column. This is how they're categorizing specific injuries that have happened. So the next slide, we're going to blow up the right side of that chart. And we're going to highlight the 6s. So everything that's a 6, 6s are good. We like to see those. Those are the ones that have been medical only. Everything other than a 6 means that some sort of indemnity or lost wages were paid. Okay. So everything that's a 6 has been discounted by 70% when it goes into the calculation of your mod. So they take these numbers on the 6s. So for example, $2,971, not the full amount of that's going into the calculation of your mod. Only 30% is 70% discount. Only 30% of that number is going into the calculation of your mod. So that's how you know what claims have we had, which ones have been medical only, which ones have been indemnity. The other most common ones are going to be 5s and 9s. 5, temporary injuries. 9 is going to be the more permanent disabilities. 9s are the ones we do not like to see, and we'll talk about that here in a coming slide. But 6s are good. 6s are what we want to focus on. Okay, so next what we're going to do is we're going to show some examples of this and the impact that these claims compared from medical only compared to indemnity. We're going to show the impact those have on a few specific claims. So first, we're going to take this top one here, this injury code number 5. It's a $14,000 claim. Okay. All right. Came on the clicker. No, you're right. All right. So we're going to take this claim, $14,000 claim. What we're going to do is we're going to remove it like it never happened. Again, this was an indemnity claim. So lost wages were paid. So there was no 70% discount in the calculation of the mod. We're going to remove it. And the full weight of that claim went into the actual losses here versus it being reduced by 70%. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove this claim like it never happened. We're going to replace it, add it back with that 70% discount in mind, and see the impact this claim would have had on our mod. There's a lot of numbers up here. Don't focus on all of these, but we're just showing you the math that you can do to calculate the impact of a claim that's indemnity versus medical only. And you can see instead of the full $14,000, as number 2 highlights, instead of that full 14 going into the calculation, only $4,220 goes into the calculation. So what impact does that have? We compare our actual losses with that new number to the expected, and your new what if mod is 1.27 from a 1.30. So this one $14,000 claim, because it was indemnity versus medical only, jumps the mod 3 points, right? So what does that mean from a premium standpoint? So we recalculate the premium with that new mod. Instead of a 1.30, 1.27, it's a $12,400 difference, right? But remember, we talked about the mod being a lagging indicator, and it has a 3-year impact. So over 3 years, that one claim, because it was mismanaged, is costing this organization $37,000. So the question becomes, is work comp actually insurance, or is it really just financing of claims over a specific time period? This would show it's essentially just financing claims. The insurance company pays out $14,000 up front. Over time, they're going to collect back $37,000.
Well, yeah, certainly if you mismanage it, and it's at a high interest rate, nonetheless, right? And so, but I think this is always really eye-opening for folks to see that, if we could manage it a little bit better and discount that to a medical only by some actions post-injury that we can control, the numbers become dramatically different over a period of time. So when people are talking about how do I get an ROI on these safety investments and such, here's one simple way that is very concrete and very, clear.
Absolutely. Again, this is if this is your only takeaway today, this is the one to focus on.
100%. And then we did have a question come in. I'll hit real quick. There was a question about if somebody's injured in another state, what waiting period applies. It's not as simple as you might think. Generally speaking, jurisdictionally, the state in which the injury happened or the claim is deemed, I guess, compensable would be the right term, is where the waiting period applies. So most generally speaking, it's going to be the state in which the injury happened.
Absolutely.
But there can even be factors if there's litigation involved, depending on which jurisdiction they determine to bring litigation, although it's generally after waiting period. So for simply answering the question, it's going to be a state in which the injury occurred.
Absolutely. And if they get hurt in that state, they can elect that state's benefits.
Exactly.
If those like for example, Iowa's benefits from work comp standpoint are more favorable than Nebraska's. They get hurt in Iowa, they can get Iowa's benefit.
Yep. Or they could choose the home state as well, whatever is more favorable potentially. So
exactly right.
Yeah. Anyway, but good question. Thanks. Keep them coming.
Yep. Great question. Okay. So we touched on here, big impact. I will say work comp, is it financing or is it insurance? If we can keep these claims medical only, I will argue that work comp is actually insurance, handled like insurance. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing. We're going to use a $3,897 claim. Very small claim. So for whatever reason, the smaller claims are the ones we want to focus on because we start to ask ourselves, what about this claim made it unique that injured employee was off of work for longer than 7 days and the work comp carrier paid lost wages? As we start to ask questions, that tells us it's a very minor injury. There's no reason that employee shouldn't have been back to work in a short amount of time. Okay, so we do the same calculation. We remove it and we add it back as if it was medical only, taking advantage of that 70% discount. So only $1,169 goes into the calculation. We take our actual over our expected. New mod is 1 point. So it took it down from a 1.30 to a 1.29. Can't have that much impact on our premiums, right? Well, 1 year premium impact, $4,000. Extrapolated over 3 years, that's $12,400. So again, when you talk about impact, one $3,800 claim is going to cost you $12,000 over time. So again, you can control this, get injured employees back to work in a short amount of time. You're ultimately going to control the biggest part of your work comp premium.
Absolutely.
So this drives people nuts when we go through it, but the impact is huge when you start to go through the numbers and the math. Okay, so this is our stop sign slide. So how do you know when a work comp carrier is getting ready to pay lost wages or indemnity to an injured employee? Typically that happens when the work comp adjuster asks you as the employer to fill out a sheet that looks like this. They are going to ask, what has this injured employee's wages been leading up to this accident? This is your sign to stop and start to ask questions, because if they want this information, that's your key to understand they're getting ready to pay lost wages. And if you in fact can get that injured employee back to work in a short amount of time and lost wages shouldn't be paid, then you should start to ask questions and refuse to give them this information. Now, some adjusters will request this information on every claim right away. If it's a small claim and you're going to get them back to work, we always say ask questions, and I wouldn't provide it to them because they don't need it if you're going to keep them on payroll. Now, you might have a tough adjuster that says they have to have it. But again, it's the sheet that you get sent that says, stop. I got to start asking questions. I got to get my advisor involved to understand what's going on here. So if you're ever asked for the pre-injury wage information on an injured employee, definitely stop and start to ask questions. All right. So we talked about nines a little bit ago. These are the ones we don't like. And here's the one exception to the rule. Nines are, if you remember, permanent injuries. So if an injury is permanent, so for example, you have a shoulder that's at 100%, right? You get hurt on the job, and you can get that injured shoulder back to 98%, but it can't get back to 100%. There's going to be a 2% impairment. So even if you can get back to 98%, but not 100, the work comp care is going to owe that injured employee that impairment, that 2% impairment. So even if it's very minor, the fact that it's not going to get back to 100%, it's technically still considered a permanent injury, no matter how severe or how non-severe. It's still going to have an impact, and it's still going to be considered an indemnity claim. So the nines are the ones we don't like to see. Nines are certainly the exception, not the rule. And they're typically the more major, higher dollar injuries. So what you can see up here is work comp is statutory. So if you do have a permanent disability on one specific body part, the states basically dictate how much you're going to get for that injury. So if you lose an eye, the U.S. average in all states is $96,700, right? But in Pennsylvania, it's $260,000. In Alabama, it's $270,000. So it's It's all state by state based. And you can see they have everything on here: legs, arms, testicle, foot, big toe. When TK and I used to do these, he liked that your middle finger was more important than your ring finger, worth more than your ring finger. So
Yeah, go figure, right?
Apparently flipping somebody the bird is more important than having a ring on your ring finger.
Go figure, right?
So it's funny how that works. But anyway, 9s are not good. It is the one exception to the rule. If you have an injury that is coded as a 9, it's automatically going to be an indemnity claim. Again, the exception, certainly not the rule. Okay. Next slide we want to talk about is claim reporting. This is tremendously important. Basically what the two graphs show here is the longer lag time from when an injury occurs to when it is reported and a claim is filed. The larger the loss payment is, so the more severe the injury is, and the higher percentage of attorney involvement. And we all know in work comp, once attorneys get involved, it just takes that claim and it just totally changes it overnight. And it takes it from small to big in a hurry.
Yeah, and if you would ask nearly any insurance company what impacts claims value more than anything, I think 9 out of 10 times they're going to say timely reporting.
Absolutely. There's a lot of reasons for it. It's a great reason why we need to train our teams to, especially supervisors, to make sure that they're communicating to their team. If you have an incident that happens, even if it's a near miss, you have to report that right away because it has tremendous impacts.
Well, and I think this goes back to that culture of working safely, which is if we encourage a culture that we're talking about near misses, we're talking about when things happen, we're rewarding good activity, and we're not necessarily penalizing bad, but we're encouraging, let us know when things happen so we can take care of our people. This just naturally is going to take place. So Again, it goes right back to that culture. When we have a culture of working safely, timely reporting of events is going to be natural.
Absolutely. And it has tremendous impacts on the cost as well. Again, it goes back to that holistic conversation. If you can look at it through that lens, the impact you can have is much, much greater.
Well, not to mention the quicker you get the attention to the injured person, the more likely the outcome for that individual is going to be more favorable.
Absolutely. Again, it's a benefit,
100%.
Right? Which you have to have it, right? And it should be a benefit. Okay, so that paints the picture and creates the foundation for topic number 3, which is return to work programs. Basically, everything we have talked about leads right into this. So we have to get injured employees back to work, also known as return to work. I'm sure a lot of you have already heard of this. We like the term recover at work.
Yep.
It's more employee friendly because as they recover, we still want them to be at work making their normal wage. Statistics show when injured employees get back to work, they actually heal faster because they're not, sitting on the couch watching TV. They're moving around. It's better for their mental health, being back to work, getting back into the routine. So anyways, return to work programs are imperative in taking advantage of that 70% discount of those claims. So what does a recover at work program look like? So number 1, we always advise having the employee acknowledge the recover at work program at time of hire. So when they're hired, making them aware of the program that says, hey, if I get hurt on the job, I know that you're going to try to bring me back to work in some sort of capacity. So if somebody's hired to, let's say, pour concrete, and they get hurt and they say, well, I can't pour concrete. I definitely don't want to come into the office and sweep or help answer the phone. So I'm going to, refuse to come back to the work. This form allows you to say, hey, you acknowledged that you were going to do everything you can to come back to work in some sort of capacity. And so when they decide they don't want to come back, it gives you a leg to stand on. Okay, so our slides here are a little out of order, but yeah, so definitely have them sign that form. We have a lot of sample templates that we can send over to give you an idea what those look like. We're going to show those here in a couple pages. Having light duty is important. So like I just mentioned, if you have an individual that pours concrete, get creative and think of things before an injury ever happens of job duties they can do if they can't pour concrete. So can they answer the phone? Can they help, sort papers? Can they sweep the shop? You can get really creative, but having that light duty list available before an injury happens is imperative. And then of course, having that internal champion, having someone that, really cares about the employee, checks in with them, checks up with them on how their doctor's appointments have been. If you can keep that communication going, claims outcomes are much better. Injured employees going to want to come back to work more. They're gonna think that and understand that my employer cares about me and my well-being. And you get the cooperation. And a lot of times we see it's the employee versus the employer, and those are the situations where the claims always get exasperated. So that's tremendously important, having that internal champion and using that proactive communication. Here's the forms I just mentioned. So again, this is a template. We just took snippets out of what those forms look like. But basically, it just says our goal as a company is to get you back to work after an injury in some form of fashion for all the reasons. At the bottom, it says, I understand that my failure to comply with the return to work program could make me ineligible for workers' compensation benefits, and my refusal could be grounds for termination. Now, of course, this is just a sample, just a template. We've had HR experts tell us that they don't love that language. Of course, have your employment law attorney review that and come up with language that is suitable. Again, this is just a template. It gets the point across. But again, after time of injury, it gives you that leg to stand on if an injured employee is ever refusing to come back to work. Because a lot of times people that are out used to working on the job site and you want them to come back into the office, they don't like it. You'd be amazed at how quickly they actually get better.
Well, and look, we're talking about all of the reasons this benefits an employer, but at the end of the day, too, getting people back engaged in the environment, working, doing something active, like that's better for them. People are happier. The injured employee, they get better quicker.
They heal, yeah.
Their attitude, mentality stays better. They're not getting outside influence they don't need. I mean, it's just there's so many positives culturally that just having this type of core belief impacts not only the company, that's the byproduct or benefit, but definitely the injured employee.
Yep, it becomes a whole culture thing. Everything starts to correlate together on that piece. So it's a really, really good point. Okay, so moving on to number 4, preferred healthcare provider. So we like the term occupational health clinics, but it's having that healthcare provider that really sees things from the employer's lens and not just the employee. Obviously, care for the employee is of utmost importance. That's number 1. But having a clinic that understands the impact that it has from an employer standpoint is tremendously important. And again, we like occupational health clinics, but having that relationship with your company, the healthcare provider, the injured employee, having that clarity on, hey, here's exactly what we do as an organization, giving them things like job descriptions, and also making them aware of your Recover at Work program will allow you to get injured employees back to work. Again, set yourself up for success. And having that one point of contact that if we have an injury on a job site or at our facility, here's exactly where you go. Because they know what you do, they know how we do it, they know all the light duty we have, and it incentivizes and it allows them to get that injured employee back to work ASAP. So tremendously important. Definitely don't let them go to the ER for non-emergent events. Of course, if it's an emergency and they need immediate care, absolutely go. But the ER is definitely not employer friendly, and it definitely exasperates a claim. So some specific points, make sure to establish points of contact at those facilities, give them requirements of the job descriptions, make them aware of your return to work, your Recover at Work program. And in medical assistance monitoring, we always recommend having somebody from the organization, such as a supervisor, somebody on the management or leadership team, go with that injured employee to the doctor. Obviously, you can't go in the room, but if you can get that story from the doctor on what the restrictions are, what the light duty available is, then there's obviously no chance of that story getting manipulated from the employee. We see that all the time. Doc says I can't come back to work. Well, it's like, is that really the case, or do you just not want to work, right? You want to sit at home. So always a fail-proof way to make sure you're getting the correct story from the doctor. Here is a form that we like to have injured employees take with them to the doctor, or if you have a medical assistance monitor, have them take it to the doctor for the doctor to fill out. What we find is healthcare providers get really good at telling us what the employee can't do versus what they can do. And this is essentially what this sheet does. So we would recommend it on every injury. You have to get this form filled out, really every doctor's visit. as treatment and care progresses, have this document filled out. It basically just tells us what the employee can do. Can they do heavy lifting, all the way down to can they sweep, do nonprofit volunteering, heck, watch safety videos, perform work at home. I mean, technically, if you as the employer are keeping them on payroll, they can stay at home and they don't physically have to come in to work. And that claim would be medical only, because the difference there is it's not the insurance company paying indemnity. It's us as the employer, keeping that injured employee on payroll. The work comp court has viewed that as long as they're being compensated, whether they're at work or at home, that is still a medical only claim. So theoretically, from an accommodation standpoint, you as the employer should think we can accommodate any restriction that you have, unless somebody's in the hospital, maybe on prescription medication, is really about the only two things, or if they're, incapacitated for whatever reason, the only two reasons why they couldn't accommodate any restrictions. So definitely something to be aware of, and that we find is often overlooked.
And I think just real quick on that, to assume that primary care providers or, typical clinics that people see for non-work related injuries, to suggest that those folks understand occupational medicine can be misleading, because oftentimes we see it's just an area of practice they don't understand. So more occupationally medically inclined clinics are going to be the route to go.
Yeah, well said. They really see it from the employer's lens. Again, employee care is number one, but when they're aware of workers' comp or return to work, the impact this can have on the employer, they're incentivized to get those injured employees back to work. Pre-employment screening. So occupational health clinics, the reason we like them is because oftentimes they do not only post-injury care, but they'll also do pre-employment screenings. So how do we catch injuries that are pre-existing before an employee is hired? One of the best ways to do that is fit for duty screening. Can they do the duties of the job that we have for them? And how do we catch any pre-existing conditions that they might have? If they already have a bum shoulder, how do we know about that? So it's oftentimes the same as a healthcare provider. A lot of different fit for duty tests can screen for anything based on the job requirements. And then conditional offer of employment. We always recommend that you can offer somebody the job, but have them sign a conditional offer that says before you're hired, you're going to have to go through a fit for duty test. And depending on the results of that, it might be means for us to pull your job offer if we determine that you actually can't do the demands of the job. So, and
again, we're protecting the individual. If they're not capable of the demands of the job, they're going to get hurt, and that's not good for them.
Absolutely. You're putting them in harm's way.
Exactly.
Essentially. So it's better for them as well. All right. So job classification and payroll accuracy. This one is important. We're not going to spend a ton of time on this one, but I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with your audit, your workers' compensation audit that you have every year. It's tremendously important because, again, to get to your expected losses, the carriers put you in specific classification codes based on the work you do and how much work that you do in those class codes. So if those numbers are wrong or if employees are misclassified, it could drastically change that audit and ultimately your premiums. So here we show if you have somebody in an office role that is misclassified into a plumbing classification code, you can see the premium impact that has because the rate is that much higher for a plumber, because the risk of a plumber getting hurt versus somebody in the office getting hurt is more. So the rate is higher for that. So managing the audit, making sure employees are classified correctly and the correct payroll amounts are within each class code is tremendously important. If not, you could be at risk of paying a lot more in premium than you actually should. Anything you want to add to that at all? Okay. All right. Managing claim reserves and loss run reviews. So claims that we have ongoing that have already happened, how do we manage those claims through to get them closed in a timely fashion? We believe this is a conversation with you as the employer, the risk advisor, and the insurance company. All three parties need to be involved. Us as the advisor, we can advocate on the employer's behalf. The insurance company, they're the ones adjusting the claim, so of course they have to be involved. You as the employer always have information first. You know these employees intimately well, So having all three parties there is where you're going to get the most impact and the most benefit of getting claims closed and managed appropriately. We recommend doing that on an ongoing basis too. The reason that's important is because this is a spreadsheet. There's a lot of information on here that we put together. Don't go through all the information. I'm just going to highlight one thing here. So on each individual claim, there is medical and potential indemnity, right? We already talked about those lost wages. Now there's a column for paid and reserve. What paid is the insurance company has already paid out those medical benefits and those lost wage benefits. What reserves are is money they have not paid out, but they are expecting to pay in the future, right? So even though the insurance company hasn't paid it out, they're expecting to. When they go to calculate your actual losses in the calculation of your experience mod, they don't use just the paid amounts. They're using the reserved amounts as well. So even though they haven't paid them, they're still counting those against you. So that's why it's tremendously important to manage those claims throughout the life of the claim and get those reserves reduced as much as possible, because that's what's ultimately going to affect your experience mod. And once that information gets sent to NCCI, it's done. You can't change it after the fact. Okay. So managing reserves is a tremendously important conversation. A lot of times you as the employer aren't going to be able to navigate this conversation, which is why you have to have the advisor on your side advocating on your behalf. Okay. So last point here, here's kind of the bonus slide. So if you remember, Andy, as we were talking about how to calculate the total premium, they take the class codes, the rate per code, multiply it by your experience mod. Then there was that little box that said credits and debits. I'm sure a lot of you were asking, what are the credits and debits? Well, that's what we're going to talk about here. And we mentioned in some states, because this is one of those things that varies on a state-by-state basis. But here in Nebraska, there is an underwriter who's pricing your policy has what they call discretionary credit. So at their discretion, based on how comfortable they are with your organization and the likelihood of you having claims versus not having claims, they can give you up to a 40%, I think it's on the next slide. Yeah, 40% debit or a 40% credit. So they can charge you 40% more, or they can give you 40% credit. Again, just based on their discretion. Okay. What they're going to give those credits or debits based on is what your safety program looks like. What does your return to work program look like? What claims have you had in the past, and what have you done to mitigate those claims, similar claims from happening into the future? So the point is, underwriters have credits to give. We just need to give them reasons to give those credits. So obviously we know your manual premium is what it is. Your mod, you can't change it once it happens. It takes a while to change it and to improve it over time. Another way to impact premium is to manage this credit and debit structure. Most people aren't aware of this at all, but it can be a big swing.
Yeah, well, and so the ROI conversation becomes real here, right? This investment in a culture of working safely. We're going to control our mod, which impacts our costs. And then we've got this entire other segment of discretion by an underwriter that can increase it in the state of Nebraska 40% one way or another. I mean, these are real dollars, all without even talking about all the other ROIs of not having to have people go home injured, not having turnover, not having families impacted, not having all the other emotional and ancillary stuff that goes along with this. So the ROI gets real when we think of this. And so, yeah, great point.
And a lot of times there's always a story to tell. So this organization, this example here we're showing, the mod is 1.30. Is that one claim or two claims that are driving that up? If we can tell a story to an underwriter and say, hey, I mean, it could have been a car accident that we're not even responsible for, but since it was an employee on the clock, that's workers' compensation. If we can explain incidences like that to an underwriter and say, here's everything we're doing to prevent that from happening in the future, the credit structure is a great way that they can reduce the impact of that mod and totally reduce the total premium that you pay on an annual 100%. Basis. So it should be a topic of conversation for your insurance renewal as you go through it from workers' compensation standpoint. We do highlight dollar amounts that shows the impact this can have. So due to the impact of the mod here, total premiums are just under $100,000. If you were to get a 40% debit, it could increase it to $135,000. On the flip side, if you get a 40% credit, it could reduce it to $57,000.
Real dollars.
So $40,000 swing from where this organization was at without any sort of credits or debits. So that's kind of the bonus slide. Definitely should be topic of conversation, like I mentioned.
Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, so with that
was a lot of information.
That was a lot of information in a short amount of time.
We left a little bit of time. Good work, keeping pace, Chase.
Thank you.
Questions? Do we have any, Cam, that came in? We had the one earlier. Don't be shy. Please ask questions. We know there's things on your minds.
And while we're waiting for questions to come in, we'll go to this last slide. So if you want to understand what your current workers' compensation program looks like today and how you stack up, you can scan this QR code with your phone to do a self-serve assessment. It'll walk you through a series of questions. I think, Cam, it's only about 7 questions. Yeah, so it doesn't take you long to go through it all. But then you can benchmark yourself and really see how you stack up, how you currently stack up to best practices and ways to improve in this area. So
yeah, it'll generate a report that'll get kicked out to you and do with it what you want. But certainly valuable to kind of understand, what are the levers that could potentially be pulled to do things better. But yeah,
absolutely. I know we packed in a lot into a short amount of time. Looks like we do have a question that came in.
That's an excellent question. So the question is, how does a claim that isn't our company's fault and it will eventually go through subrogation affect our experience mod? This is a frustrating one for sure, because the short answer is it does have an impact, right? And unfortunately, subrogation can take quite a bit of time. So until subrogation is successful, it is going to have an impact on the mod. And the reality is, it oftentimes runs the entire course.
Absolutely.
A further thing to add to this is you're going to see all the time when you sign contracts to agree to a waiver of subrogation. Just know how impactful that can be, because when you agree to that, you're waiving your insurance company's right to subrogate at all. So if you have an event that's not your problem and it could be, or not your fault, and it could be subrogated against, and there's a waiver of subrogation for that particular contractor or project, that right.
You're waiving that right.
Yeah. So great question. You want to take this one or read this one, Chase?
Yes, we definitely do recommend facilities here in Omaha.
So there is an interesting element. That's a great question. So the question is, with CHI Occupational Health closing in 2024, do you recommend any other facilities in the Omaha area? There's several good ones. One that we've seen, we've had a lot of success with recently is Strata Health. They have been in the acquisition mode, so they actually acquired a couple of the firms that maybe you were familiar with in the past, WorkFit being one of them. I'm forgetting the other one. But there's Concentra. There's a handful of good ones.
Integrated Care.
Yep. Integrated Care is another really good one. Makovica's got some occupational health options on their end. So all of those are good choices. I think it's a function of location. I think it's a function of interviewing a few, figuring out what's the best fit for you.
Yep.
We're happy to kind of sidebar that conversation, but great question. Reach out to us and we can give you kind of more detail there.
Yeah. Each clinic seems to have different offerings, whether it's pre-employment, not all have, post-injury, capabilities, to treat injured employees, but a lot of them can do the pre-hire fit for duty tests. So yeah, to your point, I think it's all about interviewing them, making them aware of who you are, what you do, and are they a good fit or somebody else better fit.
100%. Yep. But there are options.
Yep.
Awesome.
Great questions.
We'll stick around. We're approaching time, so I imagine people might start jumping off, but we'll stick around for a few minutes. Hopefully there's even more questions. We're happy to answer them, but
thank you all.
Yeah, appreciate everybody joining in and
for the riveting conversation of
well, it's a lot of information. It gets somewhat technical, we realize, but there's another question. Good. What is the impact of restrictive duty days?
So theoretically, if there's no impact, as long as you can get those injured employees back to work in some form or fashion. So if they have restricted duties and you get them back to work in a different role, as long as you're maintaining their full salary, then those restricted days should have no
If you're making them whole and the insurance company doesn't have to pay the lost wages, then it doesn't have the impact. Obviously, internally, you've got to treat how you want early on in that, whether, it's a practice that you pay $1 or they could use, PTO or whatever. There's different strategies there.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I mean, no impact on the mod itself for those restrictive days if the insurance company's not paying.
Yeah, very well said. Now, to Andy's point, you have to make them whole. So
Yeah.
if they're on restricted duty and you bring them back part-time, there's still going to be a portion of time that should be compensated.
Yep.
You got to make them whole. You can't bring them back for a few hours a day when typically they work, a full 8-hour plus day.
Cam asks, what is the best EMOD you've ever seen and what were they doing to achieve that? We've seen low ones. I mean, we've seen some that you're talking about there in the 0.56 range. I mean, at the end of the day, the answer is it's the culture piece. They were 100% had all of this ingrained in the core beliefs, values, vision, and culture of the company. And that 100% results in the lowest EMOD. But bigger than that, it results in the biggest impact of the company as a whole for many, many reasons, a lot of intangibles in addition to the mod itself. But the answer is easy. It's culture every time.
I would agree. And it affects everything. To your point, typically those organizations are the ones that have the best reputation, the best quality. People want to come to work for them. So, yeah
100%. All right. Well, that was fun. Good work, Chase. Thanks, everybody, for joining. I think we'll probably sign off at this point. Check us out online, in social, on these in the future.
That's right. Please reach out if you have any more questions on the topic. We'd love to engage in those conversations.
See y'all.
Thanks, everybody.